Hello, everybody. My name's John. I run a dance company along with my wife. The company's called TaikaBox, and we did a digital R&D. We've just come to the end of a digital R&D project in Wales. And the name of the project, this is not specifically an instruction that you have to do. This is the name of the project. A little bit about TaikaBox. I've got notes here. Why are they behind my back? Our main mission in TaikaBox is to explore new ways for people to experience dance, which is it's probably where I come in because I'm not the dance side of it. We use a lot of technology. I make interactive environments for dancers using sound, light, video, things like that. But recently we've been focusing a lot more on the audience experience of dance and researching into what people think contemporary dance might be, and what their experience of it is, and how they experience it potentially using digital platforms rather than going to a traditional theatre. So this is just some images from some of the work that we've done. It's quite varied. We're based in Wales. We work kind of internationally a little bit, but it's usually quite small scale. And as I say, it's kind of about how does the audience experience the work. Tanya, my wife, the choreographer, choreographic style is quite abstract. So initially I started to use technology to enhance the meaning and to kind of clarify things for people. And then we've ended up working. Our projects run simultaneously, so the technology and the choreography will be developed at the same time. And yeah, it's moving more towards audience development type things, which is when the Digital R&D Fund was announced in Wales. It seemed like an ideal opportunity for us to explore a little bit deeper and get some more technologists and get more digital with what we do. So we identified a problem, and it's a lot of people don't go and see contemporary dance because they think it might be old-fashioned or a little bit stuffy or not really relevant to them, or it might be a bit too weird. And so that their reaction to what they think that their reaction to come and see dance might be like this, or like this, or even worse, like this. But we strongly believe that contemporary dance is just people moving on stage, and it's moving bodies, and everybody in the audience has a body. So I'm sure people can identify with what's happening on stage, and we think that if we can get people in to see something and they enjoy it, then they'll come back. Contemporary dance is so wide, it's so varied. There's so many different scales of things and so many different styles of things that the people that I know that go and see it really love it and go and see a lot of it. So we want to try and get more people in that side of things. We tour quite a bit in Wales to small audiences. And we get to a venue and they're not quite sure how to market our work because of the kind of digital and dance crossover thing. And they get an audience of like 35 people in to see a show that we've been funded quite a lot of public money to do. And we're really disappointed, and the venue going, oh, that's amazing. Contemporary dance is so difficult to sell. So good that we got these people in. So that wasn't quite enough for us. So that's why we're pushing it a little bit further. So that was one of the problems. The other problem that we found that we wanted to work with this research was the fact that broadcast media has really embraced multi-screening. Radio shows, TV shows are really happy for people to be on their smartphones at the same time as viewing and listening and consuming the product, whereas theatre is just straight away. It's like that. We didn't like that. We thought that was kind of sort of holding back the kind of work that we do and the work that a lot of people in theatre and dance are doing. So we decided that we would try and find a way to make contemporary dance that was relevant to the people in the theatre by making work out of those people's stories. We would the initial plan was that we would improvise or find formulas to turn people's stories into movement and choreographically develop that and show the process, and then create a performance at the end of an evening. So the whole thing happens from when an audience member walks into the theatre to an hour and a half later, we show a performance that is all based on stories that have been presented by the audience member. We're thinking, wouldn't that be amazing if you could go to the theatre and then somebody makes a piece of art based on your personal experiences? And we started collecting earliest memories. We found was quite a nice one to start with. We teamed up with a company called Moon, who do digital interactive stuff, mainly with broadcasts. They work with film and television, and they build websites and all kinds of experiences. And they'd never been to contemporary dance before, so they seemed like ideal company to work with. So we developed over the first phase of the work, which was 3 or 4, maybe 5 months, we developed 2 systems, a choreographic system and a digital system. And we were really excited about the choreographic system, and Moon were really excited about the digital system, and they intertwined together to create an event. And we tested this event with various small groups of invited audiences, dancers in studios, talking to people about it. And everybody was like, yeah, that sounds really good, that's really exciting. And I think the biggest test that we did was, that was happening in this photograph here, was I think 12 people in a small theatre, and we were talking to people about what the thing we were developing was going to become. But we had a deadline, and that was we'd booked an event in quite a big theatre. We booked it in a small theatre in Cardiff, and the venue had moved it into a large proscenium arch traditional theatre, and that was looming. We had to get everything, both systems, ready for that. So, but all the testing was working really well. We were working quite well with Moon, and we developed these 2 systems, and we were really excited to be putting it on stage. So when we went public, and this is an image from the first public test, it kind of changed in a big way for lots of reasons. And what happened was initially, because the marketing material had to be ready months in advance, the brochure was going out, the venue marketing departments were talking to us about what is it that you're doing, and we're saying, well, we're doing research and we want to test it with the public. And they're saying, what's the show about? I said, well, we don't know what the show's about. Nobody knows until we get on the stage and the audience starts using their phones to share their stories with us. And then they were saying, well, what do we put in the brochure then? It was really difficult to try and get the venue to understand what we were trying to do. The venue itself was too big, really. We wanted it to be in the studio. It didn't happen that way. And things that happened, like when the doors opened and we were ready for the audience to come in, there was an announcement asking people to turn off their mobile phones, which we had no control over. Somebody had just gone backstage and pressed a button, and that kind of confused people from the outset. What we did, we'd spent a week on stage with various students. We tend to work quite closely with a dance degree course. And we'd been developing how the movement, the choreographic system would work, and the guys from Moon were there at the same time throughout the week, making sure that the system was robust enough and testing it. And then we opened up on the Friday night, and we had 130 people in, which is fantastic, and the system crashed numerous times because we had 130 people in and it hadn't been tested with that many people. The whole thing was actually too complicated. We'd done, we'd designed it all on paper and then replicated that throughout the course of the first phase, replicated that in the real world, and we'd come up with this thing. We'd take a story from people. Everybody was sending stories constantly, logging on, sending stories, and these stories were coming up on the back wall, being projected and floating around in a nice kind of aesthetic way. The 5 groups of dancers, which were color-coded, each would choose a story. That story was allocated to a color. so the audience could use their devices to find out how the dancers were transforming their story into movement, and they were using a formula like this, which instantly abstracted, because we didn't want the dancers to be miming the stories. So it became a very abstract choreographic process whereby they send the story into words and then move different body parts according to where the words fall in the story. And then we were adding emotional stuff later on. We thought we were being clever about it, but it's a little bit too clever in the end. Throughout the course of the event, people's phones would vibrate, and then they would be asked to attach an icon to each group. So we had like color-coded icons coming up, and these all meant a lot to us. If, say, the blue group had some, the voting was coming up on the screen and everybody could see their votes instantly, it was quite nice feedback. If the blue group had say the snake was voted for, then they would develop their movement into something that was kind of lower and slower, and a butterfly would have a different kind of dynamic. So we looked at dynamics, spacing and grouping, and throughout the course of the event, the audience were bombarded with these icons. We thought what they do if they see how an icon is attached to the movement, and then they can watch the process, watch the movement develop, they can sort of make the connection for themselves and kind of get the joke and work out what we were talking about with pictures of fleas and sperms and stuff. But what happens was that everybody voted for sperms because everybody liked sperms. And we had this other thing as well, whereby every now and again, because I was controlling the sound and the video and the lighting on stage, but every now and again I'd send controls to the audience. So one member of the audience would get a slider that said, "You are now in control of the sound." And it was nice. Technologically, it was really nice because they could control elements of the sound from their phone. But what they did was they got the slider, they went, "Oh, what does this do?" It's not doing anything. Because there was just, I don't know, too many variables, and it was all too loose. It wasn't specific enough. So what we ended up with at the end of the night was this. In fact, no. The feedback we got feedback. We spoke to people. The venue had put chalkboards out, which was kind of incongruous technologically, but it worked because the people that hated it and were in and out to the bar and storming off to go home and stuff, they wrote why they hated it on the blackboards. And then the people that stayed to the end and really enjoyed the performance and enjoyed the process, which was generally dance people that kind of understood it. And so they weren't the target audience, but they were like, "Yeah, this was great. You just didn't get it. You didn't get it at all because we loved it." So what we did is that we listened to those people who were our target audience, those people that had never been to see dance. And we realized that actually, yeah, we'd made some really, really fundamental bad decisions, and that the event was described quite succinctly as a brilliant, spectacular failure, which is quite hard for us because it was in our hometown and there was quite a good audience. And as the artistic organisation, our name was attached quite heavily to it. And we had another show in the same space a month later, which was a completely different thing. But we were hoping that people would have an interesting experience with the first one and come back and see something that was a little bit more a little bit more polished, a bit more artistic. So what we had to do, what we found that worked best was to communicate with these people, and we instantly started blogging about how we had failed and the decisions that we'd made, and how the feedback from the audience could inform how we then take it on and do something with the research in the future. And just reiterating to people that it is research and that it's okay for us to fail, but it's kind of difficult to swallow that as artists. We normally are making work and polishing it, and our standards are quite high. We put something on stage, we have full control over it. Giving away the control to the audience and to the venue as to how the audience were kind of connecting with the work, and to Moon, the technology partners, was really difficult. and we thought we were okay with it, but then finally when lots of things went wrong, and the fact that we were trying to break down this wall between, this barrier between the audience and the work, in fact we were just putting up lots of little glass barriers because the system kept breaking and people were just getting pissed off with it. So we went back to square one and we told everybody. We got in touch with some of the people who'd been quite vocal on Twitter during they couldn't actually be vocal on Twitter during the event because we'd set it up as a closed network, so they couldn't get onto social media. As soon as they got into the bar, they sort of reset their DNS and did complicated things like that, and then bitched about us on Twitter, which was great because we realised that actually what we need to do is these are people that we can talk to, and we had meetings with people who had given feedback, and somebody wrote an essay for us of all the things that we'd done wrong, which was fantastic because we just did them right next time. And we didn't wholeheartedly go with that side, all the negative stuff, and then ditch everything that we'd done. We retained the positivity. We knew which bits we were excited about with the work, and we redeveloped it pretty much from the ground up. We used a similar kind of technology. Moon changed it so that the system was hosted online, and then we used the router that we'd got for the project so that to just enhance the Wi-Fi that was in the theatre, because quite often there isn't. So the next stage of it was hosted online so that people could do other things as well while they were at it. So I can show you briefly what we ended up with, which we tested in other venues later on throughout the year. You can have a look yourselves, in fact. If you go to a browser and type this in, either now or later, hopefully it'll be working fine. That will give you an idea of what the user experience is. The database that's up there is the one that was from our final performance, which was in Llanelli in September last year. So all the stories that were contributed, all the ones that you see on there, were contributed in the evening and developed into choreography. So you get in, you can send stories, you can also favourite stories. So you certain stories start to become more popular than others. It's usually the funny ones about the Queen and Elvis, things like that, usually become instantly favorited. The dancers and choreographer would then take these stories, start to create movement based on the emotional content of these stories. At the same time, I'm furiously Googling away at the side of the stage to find images and video and sound that relates to the story that we start working on, which is the most popular story. Here you see the dancers working on a story about somebody meeting the Queen and saying that she was nice and quite small. I think that's what they're doing. They're doing the small bit. You've got another one which kind of just shows how everybody's stories get moderated and put on the back wall. And it's quite nice to see your story on the back wall of a theatre, even if it doesn't get chosen by the rest of the audience. Throughout the event, we went back to like a more traditional technology of communicating with the audience, and we were talking to them. So Tanya was on stage and she was talking to the dancers and she was talking to the audience, and she would say something like, "Okay, we've got like this type of movement. How shall we develop this? Shall we make it faster or make it slower? Shall we make it unison or make it solo?" And then Andrew from Moon was adding to the CMS and sending out just binary or any number up to 6, I think we had, of answers, of votes for this, that people would contribute their choices as to how we should develop the work. And there was also a button to say, "I'm getting bored of this, let's move on." So the audience had control over the structure, but we could also respond to what they wanted and be really flexible. Instead of sending pictures of sperms to people, we could send what we wanted. We could say, "Do you want this to be more like a sperm or not?" But we did, we didn't, but we could do. The last event that we did, we also streamed it live so that people at home, anywhere in the world, could have a similar kind of experience to those who were in the theatre. And we actually processed 2 of the stories throughout the evening that had come from different parts of Wales, actually. But there were people in the States and in Scandinavia, particularly, something to do with the Finnish nature of our company, who were watching the show and voting, and they had a chat room as well, so they had a little bit extra to what the people in the theatre were having. But it ended up as quite a fun experience, and we got a little bit of art in there as well. We made a couple of bits that were quite contemporary dancey. And that's all actually archived on... there's something else as well. Sorry, pleaseswitchon.com, yeah, it's you can actually watch our final event because the stream of it was archived, and so if you've got a spare hour, you fancy seeing what we did, you could go there. Another thing that we added to it towards the end of the project was initially a marketing tool, but it's kind of taken a life of its own, in that we were collecting stories from people on Twitter and then using Instagram to make short movies of their stories to kind of illustrate what we would be doing on stage, and then tweeting the link to the movie back to people. So there are people who get their own little bespoke little movies. And initially we thought, okay, we'll kind of try and get people in the area of the theatre to do this in the weeks leading up to the event. It didn't kind of work like that. Again, venues don't quite understand what we're trying to do at the moment. So what we ended up with doing is making movies for people all over the world and sending those. So that's kind of hopefully taking its own byproduct. That's got its own journey. But Please Switch On, as a research project, as we've come out with the kind of the technology that allows us to communicate with people, with an audience live, and we've got a performance that is specifically about making dance from people's stories. So that was what we ended up with. The challenges that we faced, these little headings that Rohan sent me, the biggest challenge was probably the spectacular public failure, and sort of letting go of the ego of that, and trying to not say, to defend what we were doing and saying, oh, it wasn't our fault, it kind of just got out of hand. We actually said, okay, this is research, and we did make some bad decisions, and we didn't test it thoroughly enough. And then once we'd done that, the weights kind of lifted off of our shoulders, and it freed us up in order to do some more interesting and more kind of user-led, more to do with the user experience rather than the art and the technology. It wasn't really enough to be excited about the art we were making and the technology we were making. It was like, we need to put ourselves in the shoes of the user, and what is their experience, and how can we make them excited about what they're spending their time doing. Okay, these challenges are how they informed the project. I've kind of covered that. It was something about getting the balance right between the audience focus. Are they looking at the screens? Are they looking at the stage? Or are the two things kind of a bit more blurred? And we made the user interface a lot more simple and instant, so that people, if they needed to do a vote or something, we'd talk to them and say, hey, pick your phones up, let's do a vote on this. Once they'd done it, they could then forget that they were using the technology, and then they sort of connected with the work a lot more. But also they could, if they wanted to sit, check in their Facebook status, or if they wanted to contribute more stories, it was fine for them to do that, and we were okay as performers with them engaging with their phones more than the stage, but it just didn't generally tend to happen like that. And what we ended up with is an event that keeps us on our toes and keeps us excited, because we knew that every event would be unique, however we did it. But what we've ended up with is the structure of each event becomes unique, because depending on the kind of audience that is in, sometimes we'll go quite quickly through a lot of stories, sometimes we'll focus on one. We've got facility to go back to a story, and the audience chooses which story that we go back to after they've seen the movement that's created, and we go deeper and we do a little performance. But it's more of a kind of informative, sharing, co-creative kind of thing, rather than bombarding people with technology and hoping that that is going to help them to engage with the art. And going back to the idea of research, and the whole R&D project for us was that our first phase all worked on paper, but it didn't work in the real world. So my advice to anybody on this kind of research journey is that just because it works on paper, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've explored it deep enough for it to work in the real world. And don't be precious about just tearing up that paper and starting all over again. Thank you.
Thanks, John. That's a really fabulous story. And example, we've got some time for, I'm sure there's some questions in the room based around, I'll run the mic today.
Hello. As someone who runs a venue, I would just be interested to hear your thoughts on what venues need to do better in order to sort of better represent the sort of work that you're describing.
What we've found with touring is that a lot of venues like to take control over the way that they get audiences in to see work. They like to say, okay, it's us that is bringing the work, the art, to you. And so they have their own channels, their own certain ways of marketing and advertising. And that kind of, what the company does is initially they will create some nice images and some copy. And that's as far, kind of quite often as far as they're allowed to go. And that the marketing departments of venues generally tend to be selling a lot of different work and understaffed and underfunded. So they stick with traditional methods of marketing, which is great for more traditional methods of art. But we found that it is really quite difficult to have a conversation with people, for the venues to have time and an openness and an ability to open their minds to new ways of marketing things, and to give some of that control of the marketing over to the company that's coming in, because they're scared that they'd be overwhelmed if there's something new they have to learn about a new technology or a new social media platform, or try and find new target groups. They just don't have time to do that. So we've been working the last year or so on research of trying to empower give the performing companies more tools and more power to, in addition to the way that the venues are marketing the work, that the companies can actually run alongside, and the two campaigns can be integral. And that marketing is not a dirty word for artists. It's okay.
You talked about the beta version. That you say was a failure, but that like people who were really into contemporary dance liked it, but it failed with the other user group that you're trying to reach out. When you're making decisions about how to react to that, how do you make sure that you're not just chasing after an audience of kind of Philistines and idiots? how do you strike that balance?
Some real talk.
I love the Philistines and idiots. I used to be one. The main remit of this work was to get new people into it. And if those new people happen to be people that are just kind of opinionated and feel cheated because they've come to see something that's contemporary dance and they weren't expecting it, it would be nice to still grab hold of these people and say, actually, okay, if we had done it properly, then maybe you'd be coming back to see contemporary dance. I think, the Philistines and idiots make up quite a big percentage of the population, and their bums on seats could be really useful. It depends on the quality of the work you're going to show them. If you're going to show them dance that involves a naked man with a cone on his head standing doing nothing for 2 hours, then I think we're aiming for the wrong people there. You've got to go to people that are interested in that kind of thing. But if we're trying to do like a service to the whole of, well, in Wales particularly, contemporary dance companies are all struggling, apart from the larger companies, really are struggling to get big audiences in. And we're trying to find ways to embrace more than just the dance communities to come and see work.
Final question from Barbara.
Hi, I think it sounds like a great project. I just wondered what the dancers' response was to the work that you were creating.
What we did, we trained up 5 dancers that we work with regularly, and they kind of got into the choreographic system quite nicely, and they were all quite young, and they were excited about the fact that audiences were using mobile stuff, and the challenge of improvisation. It was quite interesting for them. In the first phase that you saw, we brought a lot of students in, and they really got off on it as well. And they were initially the whole idea was that I wanted dancers to be photographing and tweeting and Instagramming and that during a performance. That was the initial seed of this idea years ago, just for something more exciting than the idea of here is the art and it's finished and there's the audience and they go and absorb it and the performers are really focused on it. I wanted it to be a bit more like real life. So what happened was at the end of the 5 days of the residency, all the 20 dancers had a great time and they thought it worked brilliantly. And when we fed back to them afterwards, they were a little bit upset because they hadn't seen how the audience had just not engaged at all and how we'd blocked off the potential for really close engagement. So we worked with the 5 dancers again in different spaces, and we added a couple more local dancers, but never as many. That it was a lot harder to control with 20 dancers on stage. So they're all really into it. They really enjoyed the challenge of improvisation but guided improvisation and opening up the process, because you can't be too precious when the process is the product. If things go wrong, then it's okay. And I think the system, the choreographic and the digital system supported them in their decision making and their movement. In fact, one of our dancers wants to take it on board and turn it into like a physical comedy project. He's very keen on his work is very humorous anyway, and he'd really like to get his hands on the system and do his own branch of Please Switch On.